I worked 3 jobs for 7 years. And nobody knew. Not my mother. Not my sister. Not a single person in my family. That was intentional. Because the moment any of them found out I had money, it would stop being my money. Let me back up. My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old. And I've spent the better part of a decade building a life that nobody could take from me. I work as a registered nurse at a trauma center, pulling 12-hour overnight shifts 4 days a week. On my days off, I do private home care for elderly patients. And for the first 2 years after I graduated, I also waitressed on weekend mornings. I don't say that to impress anyone. I say it because what comes next only makes sense if you understand how hard I worked for every single dollar I ever saved. My sister's name is Renee. She's 38. 6 years older than me. Married to a man named Darren, who has been between jobs more times than I can count on both hands. They have 3 kids, twins who are 7 and a 9-year-old, and they rent a 2-bedroom apartment about 40 minutes from where I was living at the time. Renee has always been the favorite. Growing up, she got the newer clothes, the bigger birthday parties, the college fund that I never saw a cent of. I'm not bitter about that anymore. I made peace with it a long time ago. But I want you to understand the dynamic. Because it matters. My mother has always treated Renee's problems like they were everyone's problems. If Renee's car broke down, my mother called me. If Renee and Darren were short on rent, my mother guilted me into contributing. I helped when I could. And I smiled when I did it. Because that's what you do for family. But somewhere around my 27th birthday, I started to realize that nobody in that family ever asked how I was doing. Nobody asked if I was tired. Nobody asked if I needed anything. The help only flowed in one direction. And everyone acted like that was simply the natural order of things. So I stopped talking about my finances. I stopped mentioning my savings. When my mother asked how work was going, I said fine and changed the subject. When Renee asked if I was doing okay, I said I was a little stretched and left it at that. I became very good at being vague. For 4 years, I saved aggressively. I cut my expenses down to almost nothing. I packed my lunch every single day. I drove a car with 200,000 miles on it and refused to replace it until the transmission literally gave out. I had a budget spreadsheet that I updated every Sunday morning with my coffee. And I watched that number grow month by month with a quiet satisfaction that I never shared with anyone. 18 months ago, I bought a house. It's a 3-bedroom Craftsman in a neighborhood I've loved since I was a teenager. Hardwood floors. A front porch with enough room for a swing. A backyard with an old oak tree that drops acorns every fall. It is, without question, the most beautiful thing I have ever owned. I cried in the driveway after I signed the papers. Happy tears, the kind that come when something you worked toward for so long finally becomes real. I told no one. I hired movers on a Tuesday. When I knew my mother would be at her weekly card game and Renee would have the kids at school, I gave my landlord proper notice, forwarded my mail quietly, and moved every box into my new home over the course of one long rainy, exhausting, wonderful day. My 2 closest friends from work helped me. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor of my new living room at 10 o'clock at night. And I felt more at peace than I had in years. I kept the secret for 3 months. I told my mother I had moved to a new apartment, smaller, closer to the hospital, easier commute. She didn't ask for the address. Renee didn't either. That told me everything I needed to know about how closely they paid attention to my actual life. The reason I kept it secret was simple. I had watched what happened when other people in my family came into something good. My cousin bought a new car, and within a month my aunt was asking to borrow it every weekend. My uncle got a raise, and suddenly everyone needed a loan. Good news in my family had a way of becoming a resource extraction. I wasn't naive enough to think my house would be any different. What I did not anticipate was how they would find out. It was my neighbor. Actually, A sweet older man named Mr. Patterson, who lives 2 doors down and who I had introduced myself to the week I moved in. He had my phone number because I'd offered to pick up his mail when he went to visit his daughter in Phoenix. One afternoon, about 3.5 months after I moved in, he called me while I was finishing a shift at the hospital. He said, very calmly, that there were people at my house. He said a minivan had pulled into my driveway about an hour earlier, and that several adults and children had gone inside, and that lights were now on throughout the whole house. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I had installed a security system before I even moved in cameras at the front door, back door, and driveway, with an app on my phone that I could access remotely. After I hung up with Mr. Patterson, I opened the app with shaking hands. It was Renee and Darren, and all 3 kids. Plus my mother. They were inside my house. They had found my house. And they were inside it. My mother was standing in my kitchen, running her hand along my countertops. My brother-in-law Darren was sitting in my living room with his shoes on. The twins were running down my hallway. My niece was bouncing on the edge of my bed in my room. A room she had never been invited into. And Renee was standing in the middle of my living room with her arms crossed, looking around with an expression I recognized immediately. It was the same expression she got when she saw something she wanted. I called Renee's phone. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the kids in the background. I said, "Where are you right now?" There was a pause. And then she said, "Clara, we need to talk." I said, "You're in my house." She didn't deny it. She said, "Darren's work contact does some contracting for the county. He pulled the property records. We just wanted to see it. I want you to sit with that for a moment." Her husband used a work contact to pull public property records. I found my home address, drove 40 minutes with the entire family, and entered my house, and her explanation was that they just wanted to see it. I asked her how she got in. She was quiet for a second, and then said that she still had the spare key I had given her 2 years earlier, when I was living in my apartment and had asked her to water my plants while I was at a nursing conference. I had completely forgotten about that key. I had meant to ask for it back. That was my mistake. And I knew it the second she said it. I should have asked for that key back the day I returned from that conference. I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life. But here is what I want to be clear about. Forgetting to retrieve a spare key is not an invitation. It is not permission. It is not a welcome mat. Renee used a key that was given to her for a specific, limited, completed purpose. To enter a property that was never hers. Without calling me. Without warning me. Without asking me. That is not a gray area. I told her to get everyone out of my house immediately. I told her to leave the key on the kitchen counter and to lock the door behind her. And then I told her I was calling the police if they were not gone within 15 minutes. She hung up. I watched the cameras. For about 4 minutes, nobody moved. I could see Renee and my mother talking in the kitchen. And I could see Darren still sitting on my couch. And I honestly could not tell if they were going to leave or dig in. Then my mother picked up her purse. And slowly, they filed out the front door. Renee placed the key on my counter exactly as I had asked. I watched the minivan back out of my driveway and drive away. I was sitting in the parking lot of the hospital with my hands in my lap and my heart pounding. And I called my best friend from work and told her everything. She told me to drive straight home and change my locks that night. I did exactly that. I was at the hardware store before it closed, and I had new locks on every exterior door before I went to sleep. I also documented everything. I saved the camera footage. Time-stamped. I noted the time of Mr. Patterson's call and the time of my call to Renee and the time they left. I was not planning to go to the police. But I wanted a record. A nurse learns very quickly that if something isn't documented, it didn't happen. I didn't hear from Renee that night. I didn't hear from my mother either. I think they were waiting to see how I would respond. The call came the next morning. My mother. She started gently, which is always a warning sign with her. She said she was sorry about the surprise visit, and that they probably should have called ahead, and that she hoped I wasn't too upset. I said I was upset. I said what they did was not appropriate, that they had entered my home without permission, and that I needed her to understand that. Then the gentleness stopped. She said that I didn't have to be so dramatic about it. She said it was just family. She said she wished I had told her about the house, that it hurt her feelings to find out the way she did. I said that I had kept it private intentionally, and that I had every right to do so. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Clara, you have 3 bedrooms in that house. Your sister's family is crammed into 2 bedrooms with 3 children." And there it was. I had been waiting for it. Some version of that sentence was always coming. I just didn't know which form it would take. I said, "Mom? That's not my problem to solve." She said Renee and Darren were struggling. She said the twins were sharing a room that was barely big enough for 1 bed. She said that family helps family, and that I had more than enough space, and that I wasn't even married. And didn't I feel guilty sitting alone in a 3-bedroom house while my sister's kids were stacked on top of each other in some little apartment? I want to tell you how that sentence landed, because I think it's important. I want you to feel it. After 7 years of overnight shifts and skipped vacations and packed lunches and a car held together with prayers and duct tape, after every sacrifice I made in silence, while my family received my help and never once thought to ask what I needed, I was being asked to feel guilty for owning a house. I said, very calmly, "Renee and Darren's housing situation is Renee and Darren's responsibility. I am not an answer to a problem I did not create." My mother started crying. She does this when the conversation isn't going the way she wants. I said I loved her and I had to go. And I ended the call. Renee texted me about an hour later. The text was long. It said that she was not asking to move in permanently, just temporarily. Just until Darren got back on his feet. Just a few months. Maybe 6. She would pay some rent if she could. The kids loved me. It would be good for all of us. She said she couldn't believe I was choosing an empty room over my own family. She said she didn't raise me, and then she stopped herself. Because she didn't raise me. Our mother did. And even that wasn't quite accurate. She said she couldn't believe the person I had become. I read that text 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of coffee. And I sat with it. I thought about the first apartment I ever rented. When I was 22. Working doubles at the hospital and eating ramen 4 nights a week. I thought about how nobody in my family had helped me move. I thought about the 2 years I spent paying off my student loans before I let myself start saving for the house. And how during that entire time Renee had received financial help from my mother, money that came, in part, from me. Because I had been sending my mother $150 a month since the year I graduated. I stopped sending it when I started saving seriously. My mother had never asked why. I thought about all of it. And then I picked up my phone and I replied to Renee's text. I said no. Just that. 1 word. I sat there and waited to see if I felt guilty. And I did not. I felt clear. I felt like myself in a way that I hadn't in a long time. What followed was about 2 weeks of chaos. My mother called every other day. My aunt, who lives in another state and had no direct knowledge of any of this, texted me to say she had heard what was happening and she hoped I would do the right thing. Renee swung between angry and pleading. Sometimes in the same conversation, Darren sent me one single text that said, "We're good people, Clara. Good people deserve a chance." Which I still think about sometimes because of how completely it missed the point. I didn't change my answer. About 3 weeks after the incident, Renee called and asked if she could come over to talk in person. I said yes. Because I'm not interested in having a relationship built entirely on text messages and avoidance. I wanted to look her in the eye and say what I needed to say. And I wanted to hear what she had to say. And I wanted us to have a real conversation, even if it was a hard one. She came on a Saturday afternoon. I made coffee. She sat at my kitchen table, the same kitchen where I had watched her on camera just weeks earlier, running her hand along my countertops like she was already calculating square footage, and she looked around the house and I watched her expression flicker with something complicated. She said it was a beautiful house. I said thank you. She said she was sorry for the way they had come in without telling me. She said she understood it wasn't right. And I believed her. Partially. Because Renee is not a bad person. She has made a lot of choices that have narrowed her options. And she has spent a long time expecting other people to widen those options back out for her. But she is not malicious. She is just someone who has never fully learned that other people's success is not a solution to her problems. I told her that I forgave her for the entry. I told her I would not be pressing any charges or pursuing anything legally. And that the locks had been changed and the matter was closed as far as I was concerned. I also told her that I would not be offering her family any space in my home, now or in the future. And that this decision was final and not a negotiation. She nodded slowly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. She said, "I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to help us." I said, "Renee, I have been helping you for 10 years. I helped you when you asked, and I helped you when Mom asked on your behalf, and I helped because I loved you and because I thought that's what family did. But somewhere along the way, my help stopped being something you were grateful for and started being something you expected. And the moment that happened, it stopped being help and started being an obligation. I don't want to live under that obligation anymore." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "So that's it, you're just done," I said. "I'm done being a resource. I'm still your sister. Those aren't the same thing." She left about 20 minutes later. We hugged at the door. And it wasn't a cold hug, it was a real one. The kind that carries grief in it. The kind that acknowledges that something has shifted and both people know it. That was 4 months ago. My mother and I have reached a kind of uneasy peace. She doesn't bring up Renee's housing situation to me anymore. I call her on Sundays and we talk about small things, her garden, my patients, a show she's been watching. It's not the relationship I always wished we had. But it's honest. And I've decided I can live with honest. Renee and Darren found a 3-bedroom rental about 6 weeks after our conversation. I found out through my mother. I don't know how they managed it financially. And I have made a deliberate choice not to investigate. What I know is that they did it. They found a way. In the way people find a way when they don't have another option. I sit on my front porch sometimes in the evenings. After a long shift. With a cup of tea, and the kind of quiet that I used to dream about when I was working doubles and eating ramen, and watching that savings account number grow one careful dollar at a time. The oak tree in the backyard drops acorns all through the fall and the porch swing I finally bought moves slow in the evening breeze. And the house is mine. Every room. Every inch of it. Nobody is inside it who I have not welcomed. Nobody holds a key who I have not handed one to. I want to say something before I end. Because I think it matters. I'm not telling this story to paint my family as villains. My mother loves me in the way she knows how to love. Which is imperfect and lopsided but real. Renee has her struggles. And I genuinely hope she and Darren and those kids find their footing. I hold no lasting anger toward any of them, but I want to say this clearly. For anyone listening who recognizes this situation, who has a family that treats your achievements as a piggy bank, they have partial ownership of you, are allowed to own things privately. You are allowed to succeed quietly. You are allowed to have a life that you do not offer up for redistribution the moment someone else decides they need it more than you do. Nobody gave me this house. I gave myself this house. 7 years of overnight shifts and budget spreadsheets and unromantic, unglamorous, invisible work gave me this house. And the most important decision I made in all of that time, more important than which neighborhood, more important than which mortgage rate, more important than any financial calculation I ran, was the decision to protect it. I protected it before anyone tried to take it. By saying nothing. And I protected it after they tried. By saying no. And I would do both again.